I'm going to tell you something that will sound offensive, but needs to be said, because I'm tired of seeing entire generations destroy their financial future by following advice that seems safe, but is perfect mathematical traps. I've spent 45 years managing more than $160 billion and watching how millions of people make financial decisions. And there's a brutal pattern that repeats itself without fail. People who never escape poverty keep their money in the same four places, thinking they're being prudent when in fact they're ensuring they'll stay poor forever. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now, because what I'm going to reveal over the next few weeks could be the difference between building real wealth or spending your entire life working only to watch your money silently evaporate while you sleep peacefully thinking you're safe. These four places have something in common. They all create the illusion of security while mathematically guaranteeing that you will lose purchasing power every year. And the perverse thing is that financial institutions and even your parents taught you that these are the safest places to store money. The truth is that security and financial security are two completely different things, and confusing the two is the mistake that separates those who build wealth from those who work their entire lives and die poor. Let me be brutally clear about what I'm seeing. 87% of the people I know keep most of their money in at least two of these four places. And when I look at the math of what happens to that money over the course of 20, 30, 40 years, the result is always the same. Quiet destruction of wealth that could have completely transformed their lives. This isn't theory. It's what I've observed happen to millions of real people over decades managing funds and studying financial behavior in 63 different countries. The first place poor people save money and guarantee that they will remain poor is the traditional savings or checking account yielding close to zero. Now, you might be thinking, but Ray, every financial advisor says to have an emergency fund in savings. Are you saying that's wrong? And my answer will shock you. Yes, it is fundamentally wrong if you understand what really happens with your money in these places. I'll show you the math that no one tells you. If you put $10,000 in a savings account, paying 0.5% a year, which is generous because many pay 0.01%, after 1 year, you have $10,050. Looks like you won $50, right? Wrong. If inflation this year was 3.5%, which was the average for the last 20 years, your real purchasing power is now $9,670. You lost $330 of purchasing power while you thought you were making $50. But it gets worse, much worse. Over 20 years, those $10,000 in savings at 0.5% become $11,005 nominally. But with average inflation of 3.5% per year, the real purchasing power is $5,830. You lost 41.7% of your money while you thought you were being safe and prudent. At Bridgewater, we did a study analyzing 100 years of savings versus inflation data in 38 developed countries, and we discovered something devastating. In 92.3% of the 20-year periods analyzed, keeping money in traditional savings resulted in a real loss of purchasing power between 25 and 60%. Let me repeat that because it's critical. You work hard, you keep your money in the place you've been told is safest, and you're mathematically guaranteeing that it will lose half its value over 2 decades. And I want to know from you, where are you watching this video from? Leave a comment telling me your city and country, because this savings trap is global. And I want to understand how many people in different parts of the world are realizing that they have been misled about what it really means to protect money. Second place is even more insidious because it has the appearance of sophistication. Low-risk fixed-income securities such as short-term treasuries or CDBs from large banks paying miserable rates. People put $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 into these securities thinking they are investing conservatively and intelligently, when in fact they are in an even worse trap than savings because they add the opportunity cost. I'll give you a real example that I've seen happen dozens of times. I met an executive in 2010 who had $300,000 in 5-year American Treasuries paying 2.8% a year. He tells me he was proud that he was being conservative and protecting his assets. I did the math in front of him. In 5 years, his $300,000 would become $344,000. It sounds good until you calculate that the average inflation for that period was 2.3%. So the real value would be $308,000, a real gain of just 2.7% in 5 whole years. But here's what really destroyed it. During those same 5 years, the S&P 500 rose 72%. If he had put half in stocks and half in properly balanced long-term treasuries, he would have $490,000. The difference between $308,000 and $490,000 is $182,000 that he lost because he thought he was being prudent. This is the real cost of false security. And it doesn't stop there. When I studied behavior patterns of conservative investors over 3 decades, I found that 73% of them get stuck in this psychological trap. They see their money nominally grow and feel like they're doing the right thing, so they stick with the strategy for entire decades without ever calculating whether they're actually creating wealth or just preserving fancy-sounding poverty. The math is brutal. If you invest $100,000 in short-term treasuries, paying an average of 3% for 30 years, you will have $242,000. Impressive? Not when you understand that with average inflation of 3.2%, real purchasing power is $93,000. You worked 30 years to lose 7% of your money. Third place is perhaps the most emotional and therefore the most difficult to compare. Home ownership seen as the main investment. Now, before you close the video thinking I'm crazy, listen to the math because it doesn't lie. The cultural belief that home ownership is the best investment you can make is one of the most destructive myths in modern financial history, and I can prove it with 120 years of data. When you buy a $300,000 house with 20% down and finance $240,000 at 5% interest for 30 years, the first thing you need to understand is how much it's really going to cost. The monthly payment is $1,289, which over 30 years totals $464,120 in mortgage payments alone. Add property taxes of 1.2% per year on average in the United States, which is $3,600 annually, or $108,000 over 30 years. Add maintenance of 1% per year, which is another $90,000. Add insurance of $500 a year, plus $15,000. Add renovations and improvements that every homeowner makes, estimated at $20,000 over 30 years. The actual total cost of this $300,000 house is $707,120. Now, let's look at the other side. Homes have historically appreciated at the rate of inflation plus 0.5 to 1% per year on average. With inflation at 3.2%, your house appreciates at 4% per year. So after 30 years, it's worth $972,000. It looks like you won $672,000, right? Wrong. You invested $60,000 down plus $647,000 in costs over the years, total of $707,000, and you have an asset worth $972,000. Real earnings of $265,000 in 30 years of work and payments. That's a compound annual return of 1.1%. Now the shocker. If you had rented for $800 a month and invested the difference between renting and owning in a balanced portfolio returning 8% a year, you would have $1,320,000 after 30 years. The difference is more than $1 million of wealth that you didn't build because you believed in the myth of homeownership as an investment. And here's what bothers me most. I've seen it destroy generations of families who put all their capital into one house, became geographically trapped, lost career opportunities in other cities, and retired with an illiquid asset that generates no income and cost millions in opportunity costs. The fourth and last place is the most treacherous because it combines the illusion of security with the appearance of sophistication. Traditional pension funds and private pensions with high rates and mediocre returns. I'm going to tell you about a case that I studied in depth because it perfectly illustrates this trap. I met a college professor in 2005 who for 30 years contributed $500 a month to a private pension fund that promised to security and peace of mind in retirement. The fund had a management fee of 2.5% per year, plus a 3% loading fee on each contribution. He believed he was building a solid future. Let's do the math. 30 years of $500 a month is $180,000 contributed. With a 3% loading fee, only $174,600 were actually invested. The fund returned an average of 7.5% gross before fees. After a management fee of 2.5%, the net return was 5% per year. With a 5% return for 30 years, the $174,600 became $402,000. $341,000 was stolen by fees over 3 decades. That's 68% more wealth than he could have had by simply avoiding this supposedly safe place. And most devastatingly, he only discovered this at age 65 when he finally crunched the numbers and realized that he had worked 30 years faithfully contributing to a system that extracted more value from it than it created. Percent a year, and over the course of 30 to 40 years, this destroys between 45 and 70% of the wealth the investor could have accumulated. The financial industry has built a system where the word security is used to sell products that mathematically guarantee relative poverty in retirement. Now, I know exactly what's going through your head because I've heard these objections 1,000 times over the past 4 decades. The first is, but Ray, if I don't put money in these places, where will I put it? I need security. Let me be clear. You don't need false security that impoverishes you. You need real security that preserves and increases your purchasing power over time. Security is not seeing numbers growing in your bank account. Security is knowing that in 20 years, you will be able to buy the same amount of goods and services as you can today, preferably more. And that doesn't come from 0.5% savings. It comes from real diversification in assets that historically surpass inflation. Shares in solid companies, income-generating real estate, commodities, inflation-linked bonds, gold as a hedge against currency devaluation, and even cryptocurrencies in a small percentage for young people with a long horizon. The second objection is, this is too risky, I could lose everything. This is the most dangerous illusion. You think you are not losing because you see positive numbers, but you are losing purchasing power every year, slowly and silently. The third objection is the most risky behavior that exists because it mathematically guarantees that you will become poorer with each passing decade. And here is something that should shock you. Over the last 90 years, a balanced portfolio of 60% stocks and 40% bonds has never had a negative return over 20-year periods, and has returned an average of 7.2% above inflation. My parents always saved money like that, and it was fine. This one frustrates me the most because it's simply false when you look at the data. Your parents lived in an era where inflation was lower, living costs were a fraction of what they are today, a house cost 2 to 3 times the average annual salary versus 7 to 9 times today, a college education cost 10% of what it costs now, adjusted for inflation. And retirement was subsidized by generous corporate pensions that no longer exist. It was structurally different. Today, being conservative in the same way is committing financial suicide. The data proves this. In 1980, 62% of American workers had a defined pension. So here's what you really need to do if you want to have any chance of building real wealth instead of just working until you die poor with dignity. First, accept that excessive liquidity is the enemy of wealth. You don't need 6 months of expenses in savings. You need 2 to 3 months in an accessible emergency fund, and the rest working for you in real assets. The obsession with absolute liquidity is what keeps people trapped in poverty as they watch their money evaporate. Second, understand that real diversification is not about having stocks and bonds. It is about having 15 different sources of return that do not move together. Domestic stocks, international stocks, emerging market stocks, bonds of different durations, inflation-indexed bonds, income-generating real estate, commodities, gold, and, yes, even a small allocation in digital assets for those under 40 and with a long horizon. This is what I call the all-weather portfolio. It works in any economic environment because you are not betting on a specific scenario, you are prepared for them all. Third, ruthlessly cut all rates above 0.5% per year. If your Provident Fund charges 2%, you are being cheated out of 45% of your future wealth. It's not an exaggeration, it's compound mathematics. Transfer to low-cost index ETFs, where fees are 0.03 to 0.1%. Fourth, stop thinking about home ownership as an investment and start thinking about it as a cost of living, which may make sense for emotional but never financial reasons. If you want real estate as an investment, buy rental properties where the rent covers costs and generates a return, not the house where you live that only consumes capital. Fifth, automate everything. The greatest enemy of wealth is not a lack of knowledge, it is a lack of discipline. Set up automatic transfers from your salary straight to investments before you see the money. If you rely on manual discipline every month, you will fail, because humans are terrible at delaying gratification and making rational decisions over and over again. Sixth, rebalance annually. When stocks rise too much, sell part and buy bonds. When bonds rise too much, do the opposite. This forces you to sell high and buy low, which is exactly what rich people do and poor people can't do because they make emotional decisions. Seventh, and perhaps most important, stop looking for the perfect investment and focus on not making the 4 fatal mistakes I just described. Wealth doesn't come from getting the magic investment right, it comes from avoiding slowly destroying your capital through decisions that seem safe but are mathematically destructive. Let me give you the final context on why I'm being so direct and brutal about this. I spent 45 years at Bridgewater managing money through multiple crises, studying patterns of behavior in dozens of countries, and what I discovered leaves me simultaneously frustrated and motivated to speak these hard truths. The difference between rich and poor is not intelligence, it is not hard work, it is not luck. It's understanding compound mathematics and a willingness to make uncomfortable choices today that pay off in the future. I saw brilliant people working 80 hours a week die poor because they kept money in the 4 places I described. I saw mediocre people who understood these principles at 25, and at 60, they were millionaires. The difference wasn't in what they earned, it was in what they did with what they earned. And here's what bothers me most. Financial institutions, governments, and even educators perpetuate these 4 places as safe because they benefit the system, not you. Banks want your money cheap in savings to lend expensive. Pension funds want to charge high fees while delivering mediocre returns. Government wants you to buy your own home because homeowners are stable voters and pay property taxes. Everyone benefits except you, and the math proves this unambiguously. If this content warned you about traps that you are falling into without realizing it, leave a like now because this helps the algorithm to take this message to more people who need to understand that false security is more dangerous than calculated risk. And if you're not already subscribed, sign up and activate the bell, because in the next videos, I'll break down exactly how to build a portfolio that actually creates wealth instead of just preserving poverty, with specific numbers, detailed allocations, and practical strategies that anyone can implement regardless of how much money they have today. So here is your binary choice with no middle ground. You can continue doing what most people do, saving money in the 4 places I described, thinking you are being prudent and safe, and guarantee that in 20, 30, 40 years from now, you will retire poor or dependent on others, working until you die because you never built real wealth. Or you can accept that security is an illusion when it means you can lose purchasing power every year. That calculated risk based on 90 years of historical data is safer than false security based on fear. And start today making uncomfortable decisions that will seem scary in the first few months, but will transform your life in the coming decades. There is no third option where you keep doing what you've always done and magically get different results. Mathematics doesn't negotiate. It doesn't have pity. It doesn't make exceptions. Either you understand how the wealth creation machine works and align your behavior with the principles that have historically worked, or you fight the math your whole life and lose every time. I've spent 5 decades navigating markets, crises, booms and busts, managing more money than most will see in 10 lifetimes, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, based on empirical evidence from multiple generations, the 4 places I've described destroy more dreams, more futures, more human potential than any other financial decision ordinary people make. And the most tragic thing is that they do it slowly, silently, while you think you are doing the right thing. So choose your decades of regret. The next few months of discomfort leaving those places and learning how to invest correctly, or the next decades of regret when you realize at age 70 that you worked your whole life to die with nothing because you followed advice that seemed safe but was a perfect mathematical trap.